Some people call this process mission action planning or planning for the future. And many of you will have done this in different ways, maybe over the years. But presumably you're here because you'd like to see maybe how somebody else does it, or you think it just looked like a better workshop to choose, rather than having to do it all yourself. So I encourage you to find your booklet, which was in your delegate bag, and we are going to whiz through it. Just to let you know, we're going to weight our time towards the latter steps of the process. So the first 3 steps that we're going to look at in the book, we're going to do very quickly. And it won't be enough time for you to actually do it. But at least you'll be able to think about it and think, okay, that's a helpful step that I need to find time to do. Maybe with the other leaders in my church, or even some of the young people and children that you work with. Okay? So, I think that's enough explanation. Philippa and I are going to do our best to take you through this process, and Philippa's going to look at step number 1.
Before we can evaluate our ministry, it's worth considering how are we going to measure success? What is it that we're measuring up to? And I don't know about you, but whenever I started a new group or a new activity in the past, what happens is that well-meaning people come up to me and say, how's your new group going? Have you got many people coming? And we so often use numbers to measure our success. I get it, they are quantifiable, they are easy to track, and they're really useful for putting on grant application forms. And I think for some of us, the problem is that our ministry would look and feel a little bit gloomy if we were only tracking the numbers of people who are attending. And actually, some things work better with smaller numbers. Jesus chose 12 disciples. I'm guessing there's a reason that he chose 12 rather than 120. So numbers are a measure, but they're not the only measure, and in many cases they're not the best measure. So the first thing we're asking you to consider in a moment is how will you measure success? So we've put a few options in the workbook for you to have a look through. Not an exhaustive list, but some of the things you could be sort of measuring are discipleship. Perhaps it's missional activity, so the frequency of sort of making connections with the local community. Could it be about the number of children or young people who are serving leadership roles in your group or in your church? Could it be something to do with the number of children or young people or adults being baptised or confirmed or entering into membership or some other form of commitment to faith? Is it something intangible, like the quality of the friendships that are formed? I always feel, actually, like sort of a job well done when at a toddler group you hear of parents or grandparents who organise a little play date outside of the group. You think, yeah, great, this group has done something really good, really useful here. Could it be something about like the energy of a group? Or the quality and the meaningful conversations that you have? Is it about the number of new people joining? Or something about the way that lives have been transformed? As I said, this isn't an exhaustive list, so is there another way that you could measure the success of your group or of your ministry? Galatians 5 also talks about the fruits of the Spirit. Are they something that we could look at as a measure of success? So, step 1, what's your vision for a successful group? How will you know, yeah, this group is really going great? And what do you think is God's vision for success in your ministry? We're going to hand over to Mike for step 2 and 3, and then we'll have time to think about the answers to those.
That's an important starting point. If we measure success by how well we have cut out some shapes and how how well we've created some activities, we might be measuring the wrong thing. So that's a really important one to think, what are we measuring? Steps 2 and steps 3 we're going to put together here. Step 2 asks the big question, where are you now? How are things going? And we'd encourage you to not just be critical at that point. Some of us tend to find things that need fixing, or the things that aren't going so well, and say, oh, I wish it were more like this, or I wish we were in this kind of place, but we're not, and oh, this has happened recently. Can I encourage you to think about the things you can thank God for from the children's and youth groups that you're involved with, or the school's ministry that you're involved with. Celebrate the good things, but also be realistic and identify the difficult things. It's a good point throughout this process to engage in what you think God is saying at each step. So what does God say about where you are at, where your group is at? Maybe there are challenges that you feel that the children or young people that you work with face, that in your community there are certain things that are hard. It could be all kinds of things. It's good to identify those things so you know what you're facing and what your children and young people are facing. And I wonder if you've ever asked the children and young people where they're at. It's an important question for us to ask. I'm sure through the activities and the programs that you run, you will know where your children and young people are at. But it's worth taking note. How do they feel about things? Where are they at? In the booklet, I've also added Psalm 23. As I was thinking about this step, I found this is such a poignant psalm to consider where we are at, whether we feel we're walking through meadows of plenty, or whether we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, whether there are different things going on that we can be aware of. God is with us. So step 2 is very much, where are you? Step 3, I will click through further, asks the big question, how do we feel about where we're at? There's one thing identifying it, and then there's another thing being real with how we feel about it. We might be feeling positively energized for the challenges that we face. We might feel optimistic about the future and what our role is. Or we might feel tired, or confused, or aimless. So our feelings are an important part in this whole process to recognise. And I guess the challenge is, how can we get ourselves into a place where we can see a positive, adventurous, optimistic future, despite the challenges or the obstacles that we might have identified. I think the booklet also talks about how we can share with a friend about how we feel about things is often one of the best ways to process those feelings. I wonder what God feels about your situation as well, how God feels about your group. Does his heart break for them? Does his heart rejoice with them? So steps 1 to 3, as you can see, are quite reflective and quite real. And we want to give you a few minutes opportunity, just where you're sat, either on your own if you're a reflector, or with people that are around your table if you would like, to spend some time just looking at those 3 steps in your book, picking out maybe some of the important questions in there that really resonate with you, that you think, yes, that's the bit of work we need to do. We'll give you 5 or so minutes just to chat stages or steps 1, 2 and 3. And then we'll have a little chance for some questions if people want to ask questions for clarification, or even if you have some expertise, some experience in looking at these particular steps, we'll withhold from getting too far forward in the process. But if you have some experience that you'd like to share, or some activities or processes that you've gone through to help with these first 3 steps, then we'd love to hear. Is that all right to start with? So have 5 minutes just chatting as you wish, and then we'll come back together for some questions.
All right, I'm afraid that has been 5 minutes. As we did say, that it's got long enough to do it properly. So, as we sort of round off for the moment steps 1 to 3, is there anybody who has any questions or anything that you sort of that you would like to share? Michael, come with the microphone so.
Well, this is going to be a quick workshop. No questions, no experience, no little anecdotes of we did this, it was really helpful. Thank you, Emma.
Just to say that, like, what Philippa was saying about numbers, so I have 6 that are supposed to come on Sunday morning. I'm lucky if I get any of them to turn up on Sunday morning. But then the other week, having seen his mum baptised, one of the lads who's 14, he's come and told me he wants to get baptised. So even though we might not see him every Sunday, he's obviously got faith. And hopefully we'll be baptised on Easter Sunday.
Amazing. That's
Thank
really
you. It's very worth sharing, very worth sharing. It's important what we're looking at, what we're measuring.
fabulous. All right, in which case, on to step 4. So once you've given proper reflection time to what a successful group is going to look like for you, and you've reflected on where you are right now, how you feel about it all, hopefully that process, when done in more than 5 minutes, will have revealed some gaps, perhaps, or some areas of growth that you want to focus into. So the next step is going to be to consider the barriers. What might be stopping us from growing towards our vision? We're going to separate out problems and solutions for a moment. Sometimes it's really easy to just jump straight from one to the other. And I think it can be valuable to allow a bit of space for the problems, to build up a whole picture and allow ourselves to feel frustrated, disappointed, or whatever other emotions we might feel about it. So we're going to do that first, and then we'll tackle some possible ways forward once we've got ourselves a full picture. So what are some of the sticking points? What's getting in the way? Is it an external problem? Your meeting space isn't working for what you need. Your church is in the wrong location, perhaps, or it isn't accessible, or you don't have the right resources, or you're lacking finances for what you want to do. Is it a challenge to do with leaders? Not enough of them? Or you do have them, but they're just not feeling like a great fit for your group at the moment? Is it a lack of training? Or is it that they're stretched beyond capacity with life stuff or with health issues? Is the challenge about the people within your group? Is there challenging behaviour from children or young people? Maybe the impact of stuff that's going on outside of your group times. School issues, poverty, hunger, difficult situations at home. Are they getting bored, needing something more, something less, something different? Or is it a stuck in a rut kind of feeling? You're stuck in an old pattern of ministry that just got tired. Something that worked really well 5 or 10 years ago, but it's just not working now. Do you feel held back by church leadership or church council that just aren't catching your grand vision? Or is it a focus problem? You're stuck on a Sunday morning or a Tuesday afternoon or a certain age group or a certain location, and actually focusing on that thing is holding you back. Are you trying to do too much and you need to cut back or try something different? Is there something that you need to release in order to grow? Again, we're going to offer you a few minutes time. It says 3 minutes of thinking time. To be honest, we're currently about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, so I'll offer you 5 minutes instead of 3 minutes. So, yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes just to start prayerfully reflecting and asking God, what is it that's all other different things? I'm sure it's not always simple as sort of one issue, is it? But yeah, just 5 minutes to start thinking, what are some of the things that are holding us back in ministry at the moment?
Okay. Allow me to interact with Philippa. Hope this is helpful, even if it is just initial conversations. I hope you're realising also this isn't a complete process. It's a longer time of reflection, a longer time of talking with others. Do involve the children and young people in as many of these steps as you possibly can. Sometimes we forget that important step. Ask them where they're at, ask them where they'd like to be, ask them how they would like to get there. Involve them in all of these processes. We are going to get to, I think the only way to call it is the business end of the session, and that's why we're going to give it the most time. Steps 5 and 6 we're going to put together, partly because step 5 is talking about it, step 6 is doing it, really. Step 5 asks the important question, what are the different options in moving forward? Some of us are tempted to go with the first thing that we think of. I don't know how you plan your activities or your groups, but I'm a bit of a stickler for having an idea and then going with it, and not necessarily thinking, was that the right idea to go with, or was there a better one? So this step is quite important in doing this really well, is to think, what are all the different things that I could do moving forward? Having recognised the barriers that I've identified, and I've thought about maybe are there any negotiations that I need to make in going forward, maybe with the church leadership, maybe with your other leaders, maybe with parents, maybe with the children and young people themselves. Maybe there's a bit of work to do in a conversation or a negotiation to think about the different ways forward from here. Do involve the volunteers. Most of you possibly are volunteers in your role. Some of you might be paid in your positions. Work as teams as you move forwards. Listen well to each other and the wisdom that might come in your group. You might have an idea and think, I'm going to ask everyone what they think, but actually what we're going to do is my idea. Do well to listen as well as you can, to hear God speaking through each other and be ready to make changes or adjustments or even to scrap your own plans in preference for what you feel God is saying through somebody else. One of the big things in step 5 is, do we need to stop doing something? Sometimes we try and fix things so much that it becomes such an ugly thing because we fixed it so much and we battered this bit together, we stuck it, we're hanging on and we're just going to keep hanging on, and there's maybe a lot of reasons why it would be helpful to say, should we just put this down for a time? Sometimes allowing something to stop produces some space for something new to grow. I remember a time when I felt I needed to step down from helping in one of the youth groups and found that a difficult thing to do. It was around the time when we were adopting our son and I wanted to take time out. So I felt there was a good excuse to take a break. But what I watched was the youth group just kind of stopped happening after that, and I felt guilty that I'd been holding it together quite wrongly. And when I stepped out, it stopped. And it took me a while to reflect on that and say, was that the right thing or the wrong thing to do? Because it felt like the wrong thing at the time. So sometimes we face difficult decisions. But prayerfully and in conversation with others, try and make those difficult but right decisions. Does that make sense? So stopping things is not always a bad way forward. And And my last point, and I've said it a few times, is involving the children and young people. You might have some thoughts about how to move the group on. You might have thoughts of how you want to change things, or the kind of activities you want to do, or maybe you want to change the start and end times. Maybe you want to start charging the young people to come. Maybe you want to start doing activities every third week. You mean, whatever changes that you might be thinking about, find a creative and engaging way to glean what the children and young people think about it. Sometimes when you ask young people what they want to do, it's the most unhelpful question you could ask, because they'll say skydiving, I want to go to America, although maybe you wouldn't at the moment, they'll come out with blue sky thinking activities, which you think, this is great, but we have no way of making any of those things happen, and then you have to bring them back down to earth and say, well, we could maybe go bowling. Is that the same? Quite the same? So it can be a difficult question to ask unless you set some parameters. So do ask the children and young people where they think you could go, but keep them realistic with where things are. But don't close the lid of the box too tightly and say it has to be in this arena, because they may well just open the box and think, yes, that would cost some money, but we could fundraise, couldn't we? That doesn't have to be a reason why it doesn't happen. So involve them and hear God speaking through the voices of the children and the young people.
You will have noticed in your booklets that step 5 is really long. It's like 3 or 4 pages long. So I'm going to talk about the second half of step 5, which is ideas for moving forwards. We've compiled a massive list there of possible ideas. It's nowhere near exhaustive, and the majority even might not be right for your setting or for your church. But hopefully 1 or 2 in there will be. I'm not going to read them all out, but instead I just wanted to sort of pull out a couple of ideas. I regularly quote Mike on this, and I'll put it somewhere in that booklet. If we're sharing the good news, we want to start with good news. So what will good news be where you are? So perhaps what are the gaps that are missing in your community? An example of this, I was talking with somebody the other week, who in fact is in this room, and he said, and I should say now, I'm going to mistell what happened, so apologies as I do that. He said he was watching Luke Littler on TV playing darts, and he thought, where's the nearest place that we can play darts? And the answer was, I think it was over half an hour ago. It was far. And so, as a result, I thought, oh, could we set up a darts club in the church hall? It's something that's missing. Another thing to think about is who is passing your church, or who's coming to your church anyway. So if you have streams of secondary school-aged kids walking past your church every day, could you do something for them? Could you offer them hot chocolate once a week? Or if you've got a primary school next door, could you run an after-school club? Or think about who's already coming into the building. What's going well that you could build on? So if you have young people or families who are regularly attending a non-faith-based group, maybe a toddler group or a youth group that faith isn't a focus, could you invite them to kind of the next step in faith, whether that's like a youth alpha or an alpha or a parenting course? Or if you have regular members in your youth group or in your children's group, could you encourage them to take a step towards maybe a bit of a leadership role within the group or within the church? It's also worth thinking about what skills do you have in your team already? Because if you've got someone who's amazing at cooking or football or darts or photography or gardening, make use of it. There's a lot to be said for running a group, doing something that you really enjoy doing. And I think often that passion and enjoyment comes through, doesn't it? And I think the flip side of that, I think, is also don't feel that you have to keep going with something, or don't feel pressured to start something that is just absolutely outside of your skill set. There's no point in you running a football club, it's not going to be good. So, yeah, think about your skill set, what you've got within your team, and go with that. And equally, what skills do you have within your children or young people? Again, I know of one youth group where the young people, I think they're like, they must be like year 6, year 7 kind of age, maybe a little bit older. They take it in turns on a rota to run the games each week at youth group, because the kids love coming up with ideas for games, and they're quite good at organising them, and a lot of the leaders are quite shy and don't love leading games. And so that's kind of ended up as a win-win situation. The kids have got a bit of a chance to lead and to step up, and it takes something off the main leader's plate.